Riane. For a quick room set, this is I can't overstate how incredibly important the dear Riane Eisler is. Not only because she's probably the oldest person on Twitch right now, like this very exact second. Riane is 94 years young, right?
Yes.
And Riane has also, I would argue, written some of the most important books of our century. They have cracked open so many theories about equality, about women's roles, about law. Riane, you and I didn't even have a chance to catch up on some of our equal rights amendment efforts over the past year. And I know that you were foundational in moving as much as you did in the 70s and 80s on that front. So I'm going to ask you to bear with me as I read a little bit of a bio of yours, because I think it's so important, because the first question I ask you is going to be really hard.
Okay.
So Riane Eisler is an Austrian-born American systems scientist and cultural historian, futurist, and she also has a JD. But she is best known for all of her works on gender power economics and social systems. Riane and I spent a lot of time considering new economic metrics and what it's going to take to really equitize the world on all fronts. Riane is a Holocaust survivor, a refugee who fled Nazi-occupied Austria as a child, and her early experiences of trauma, being on the last ship out of Europe, and then successfully living in Cuba for 5 or 6 years. Were you in Cuba? 7.
7.
And
I grew
then
I grew up in Cuba.
sought asylum in the US, right?
Yes.
Yes. And
Yeah,
now
we
in
just got a visa.
got it. Um, are you a citizen? Now you
Yes.
are. Yes, okay. And as a child, she posed the question that I think so many children who are paying attention to the world, a very simple, basic, innocent question, one that doesn't haunt adults enough, which is, does the world really have to look the way that it does? Do people have to be as unkind and as harmful to each other as they have been? And she wrote a book in 1987 called The Chalice and the Blade. And it became an international bestseller and remains a seminal work in feminist and peace studies. Um, Riane's work also inspired Dan Brown. That's sort of this random anecdote that I continue to add, that Dan Brown wrote the Da Vinci Code off of Riane's research related to reconsidering some of the stories of some of the Abrahamic religions. And as Riane, in all of her beautiful books, reminds us, that all of those stories and all of archaeology and all of the system scientists have all been men for many hundreds and thousands of years. So of course they're interpreted with a very significant bias. She is the founder of the Center for Partnership Systems and has written books like The Real Wealth of Nations, which we'll talk about in another episode. But this is the first conversation that we are having with Riane, an international treasure, not just from her specific life experiences, but how she is finding a way to merge so many of our concerns, so many of our heart spaces with some of the systems that we are trying to undo, fix, rebuild, just collapse, whatever it might be today. And we are starting, because of the events of the past 24 hours, in a very specific place around Riane's theory of domination-based systems and how they thrive, where they're rooted, where we can focus our attention on maybe uprooting them. And I'll ask Riane this sort of one very specific question today, which is, where do you see, how is domination and domination-based systems thriving today? Um, and what are we going to do about it?
Well, what we're going to do about it is to show that there is a better alternative.
Amen. And where do you see domination culture rearing its head today?
Well, it's happening globally. It's happening right here in the United States. Um, and really, it is not adaptive because, we hear so much about only the strongest, the title of the theme of our show today, that only the strongest survive. But no, that just isn't true because we not only are interconnected through technologies of communication and transportation worldwide, uh, but we're also interconnected through technologies of destruction, nuclear bombs, and more slowly climate change. And really, the domination system, which is really based on the domination and exploitation of people and of nature. And I say people because men don't have it so well or so good in domination systems. Just think about it for a moment. In a domination system, you have to give nothing less than your life because some guy on top, and it is a top down system, he wants more real estate, like a Putin. You know, millions of people are dying. And yeah, men are fighting for that guy on top to get more real estate, Ukraine. So it's not really functional in an age of
I'm
nuclear
having an
power
audio issue.
and an age of climate change. It is not adaptive.
Can you hear me, Rianne?
Yes, I can hear you.
There we go. So as can you talk a little bit more about what domination means and that dominating is the extraction of resources from people and planet and why that is a myth that we have to undo, that in order to have power and survive and thrive that doesn't actually have to be the model.
Well, we're told falsely that it is inevitable. Think of the caveman cartoon. Speak of gender now. With one hand, he's pulling by the hair a woman, and with the other one, he's got a club, a weapon. So, what are we told? The domination system is natural, inevitable. It's been there since time immemorial. And that is a lie because we have more and more evidence that for millennia, thousands and thousands, and actually millennia of our cultural evolution as humans, we did not orient to the domination side of what I call the partnership domination social scale. And really, only 5 to 10,000 years ago, 5 to 10,000 years ago, which is a blip in our evolutionary history, did this shift to domination occur. And there are many nations today, but Ireland, for example, shifted just like that from a domination nation to a partnership nation. Nordic nations, Finland, Sweden, Norway, they have caring policies, feminine policies. And yes, gender, how gender is constructed is not just a women's issue, or lately we've heard about the men's movement. Thank goodness I've been involved in it for ages because it's just as important to change the definition of quote masculinity as yeah dominating violence etc as the definition of learned helplessness and subordination of femininity and of blaming and shaming um, women. I mean, half of humanity, we all have a mother, don't we? Wow. I mean, that was a stroke of domination, really propaganda for the domination system to blame Eve or Pandora for that matter, or the Queen of Heaven, or just, we didn't know, Zoroastrianism, because we're not the only people who have this legend. It is built into domination systems.
Riane, can you tell us a little bit about what happened 5 to 10,000 years ago that was part of the shift?
Well, the evidence in Europe, and most of our archaeological digs are in Europe because Western culture has become predominant. It wasn't always so. And it was certainly not the only colonial power. I mean, the Arabs were a colonial power before the West became a colonial power. Uh, but what we know from European history is that it was invasions uh, from the arid parts of our globe, pastoralist, nomadic people uh, who came in, and we have archaeological evidence of this. We have mythical, oh, lots of mythical evidence of this. And we even have DNA evidence of this. So, yes, domination came into being through fear, through force. But it is taking us today to an evolutionary dead end.
Oh, no. Can you talk about the mythical part of all of this? I've been personally struggling with my relationships with the Abrahamic stories of starting 3,500 years ago, right? I think I have that math correct. And in large part because I've been reading so much of your work, which has made me ask just harder questions about who were the authors and what their intentions were and what is the actual archaeological evidence. One of the bits that I so appreciate that you shared with me many years ago was that, um, you know, women's studies programs have just started in major universities 50, 60 years ago. And there were not a lot of women who were part of archaeological digs interpreting the artifacts that were found. And at your suggestion, I went to Crete, I think it was 3 years ago, and you told me to look specifically for a painting that I found like on the below the chair rail in this museum in Crete. And you said, just make sure you look for that one high priestess. And I want you to see all the people who are walking up to her. All of these paintings prove that women had as much power as anybody, if not maybe it was or wasn't in a matriarchal society, but that there was a narrative shift from egalitarian societies to strongman theory that was or wasn't led by some of the Abrahamic versions. Is that accurate?
Well, first of all, we are told that the alternative to patriarchy is matriarchy, and that mothers rather than fathers are on top. And that is not the alternative to patriarchy. The alternative to patriarchy is a partnership oriented society. And you see this in the fresco that from Crete that you just described. At
Do you
the
know the name of that fresco? Because Jay will pull it
a
up.
procession fresco.
The procession fresco. I will know it when I see it.
Yes. And at the center of it stands a woman with her arms raised in benediction, the same gesture that the Pope uses today to bless. Uh, and on both sides are men, priests, carrying wine fruits to her. And they're all on the same level. A marked contrast to the art that comes later, where you have statues, for example, of Zeus that are 50 times bigger than the people groveling at the base. Okay.
Mm, mm.
Uh, this is a completely different conception of power. It is still power, but it is not the power to dominate, to control. It is, well, if you mentioned my book, The Chalice and the Blade, and the cover, which was really brilliantly designed. Well, first of all, the terms chalice and blade, right? People sometimes mistake it for feminine and masculine because those are our gender stereotypes, but that's not what they are. Caring is a human characteristic. And there is the procession fresco. You see, in the center is this woman, right? Queen, priestess, and these men and also then women are coming to her with gifts, priestesses and priests. And the gifts are wine, are food. It's very interesting, isn't it? And but back to the chalice and the blade, which are the uh, imagery of the title, they really symbolize power in either a partnership system or a domination system. The chalice symbolizes a very different power from the blade. We know the power of the blade. It's the power to control, the power of fear, the power of taking life, really. But there's also the power of the chalice, which is to nurture life, to give life, to illuminate life.
So
And
when did it shift? Who was like, "Actually, we're gonna do a binary top-down model, and we're gonna put men on top."
well, this seems to have shifted according to the archaeological evidence, to the DNA evidence in our prehistory, long before, by the way, the Abrahamic religions. And I got to turn off my hair. Well, anyway, long before it'll stop.
It's fine.
Life in the age of cell phones. And I forgot to just turn mine off.
It's fine.
Uh, so it was with, as I said, with invasions. But today, this power of the blade, which was then, involved. And by the way, we have DNA evidence of this in early Balkan communities where the DNA shows that the original male population was almost completely exterminated and replaced. Isn't that something?
Sorry.
Even
Walk me through that again.
we have DNA, we even have DNA evidence that the original population of what the archaeologist Maria Gimbutas calls the civilization of old Europe, that they were the male population was almost completely replaced. I mean, this is DNA, but we also have archaeological evidence. For example, we have new ways of burying people that Buddha's called sati graves, because for the first time we have this large male skeleton with killed women and also children and horses killed to accompany the ruler, by then the dominator, in the afterlife. So you see a complete change in the burials, in the art, um, glorifying really the lethal power of the blade and ignoring what we know today from physics. You know that two physicists just got the Nobel Prize
Oh,
for
I'm
their
so
work.
embarrassed. I don't know about the
Well,
physicist
let
who
me
got the
tell
Nobel
you,
Prize.
because they got their work on they got the Nobel Prize in physics for their work on entanglement of interconnection on the subatomic level. And you can look it up. It happened last year, I believe, or early this year. But we are interconnected, as I said earlier, not only by technologies of transportation and communications globally, but we're interconnected by technologies of destruction, nuclear bombs.
Yeah.
and more slowly climate change. So the domination system is no longer adaptive. The power of the blade, uh, which always caused enormous suffering, of course, is no longer adaptive.
But isn't it adapting worse? Like, isn't it getting more bladey? This is my next question, which is why do you think domination narratives resonate so deeply today?
Well, because we have inherited them. We have been told the story of, blaming Eve or Pandora for all our ills,
I
right?
actually don't know the Pandora story. I
Oh,
know
well,
it's Eve's fault.
it's the same story. She has a box,
Oh,
instead of eating
yes.
from a tree, and she opens the box, and all of humanity's ills fall, fly out.
Sorry,
And,
where's Pandora in the
oh, that is in Greek mythology.
is Eve Pandora's doppelganger?
Well, yeah, in a way, it's the same story.
Yeah, okay.
Just as selfish genes and original sin is really the same story. Both stories maintain a domination top down, man over man, man over woman, race over race, religion over religion, ethnicity over ethnicity. Um, it is, as I said, we have grown up with this. We have been fed. Look at the a caveman cartoon. With one hand he's pulling a woman by the hair, with the other one he's got a club, a weapon. I mean, it's baked into the domination heritage that we have. And naturally, you mentioned the domination regression that we're going through globally now. um, Look, the real struggle for our future, and whether we even have one, is not between right, left, religious, secular, Eastern, Western, Northern, Southern. None of these categories, they all fragment our consciousness. None of them tell us that there is an alternative. Because why? Because there have been repressive, violent regimes in every one of these categories. The real struggle is between the domination system and a tremendous movement, but in bits and pieces. There's the women's movement globally, there's the new children's rights movement globally, there is the anti racism movement, there's the environmental movement, there are movements for peace. All of these movements are challenging the same thing, a tradition of domination. And we have been brought up since childhood, starting in our families, that that's reality, right? Well, we know that it wasn't always so, and we also know, or there wouldn't be all of these movements of people working for more peace, for more equity, for a better world. If there weren't that defense that we humans have. We've been told a distorted story of human nature.
But
Okay.
it seems like everybody everywhere embodies, like, knows that story. The From, like, mental health providers to certainly people of it seems like every faith has a top-down story, and then it's for me, my frustration is that then every faith, even if it's part of salvation, seems to get hijacked to that's how it's always been, survival of the fittest, and I'm just so confused, I guess as somebody who's seen what you've seen, somebody who's survived the Holocaust and seeing what you're seeing. Does this feel cyclical, and do you feel like we're inching out of domination, or do you think we're just staying in this domination cycle even more or getting worse?
As I said, the struggle for our future is those who want to pull us back to even more rigid domination, and those are people who are challenging one tradition of domination after another. And really, these movements didn't come out of no place. They came out of human nature, our wish for something better, our wish to change this quote veil of tears. Remember, that was the religious, you know, call for accepting just what is and only caring about what happens before we're born and after we die.
Sorry, actually, I'm not following. What is the Veil of Tears?
Reality on this earth, that's what we were told is a quote, veil of tears by the Catholic Church, by Christian tradition. And that is simply a way of rationalizing and supporting a domination top down system. And by the way, there are hierarchies. I had to coin new words, just as we need new stories. Um, look, every society needs parents, needs teachers, needs managers, needs leaders. So hierarchy is not the problem. It is how power is conceptualized and used. And really, in domination hierarchies, have you noticed that accountability only flows from the bottom up, not from the top down?
But that feels like it's gotten worse just in the that feels like it's gotten worse in just 10 years.
Well, because of all of the movements towards partnership. And see, what we lack is a frame. I've written articles on this,
500.
on this. Yes, thank you. Um, but it's very hard to change our worldview when constantly we are bombarded. Uh, well, first of all, we lack the frame. If you look at what, this regression that you're talking about, it really focuses on gender. And that's not just in the United States, where our president tells us that there's only women and men and there's nobody in between. And that, yes, these gender stereotypes and this ranking of male over female, well, that is not a quote women's issue. That is a fundamental family, economic, and institutional social organizing principle. Because look, what are we taught? We're taught that there's two forms, right, of humanity, female form and the male form. And we are taught that difference, because they are different, uh, is to be equated with superiority and inferiority, with dominating and being dominated, with being served or serving. So this is baked into domination systems, and it does start with what we today call gender.
So, the binary I've spent a lot of time wrestling with folks around the binary, like and sometimes people are like, "Oh, that's just people are desperate to interpret and understand the world in a simple way." My background as an early childhood educator, am I'm allergic to that theory because I actually think and I witnessed in my own children and in myself as an adult that actually living in the gray is so much more free, that actually shedding the rules, shedding the definitions, avoiding the exactness is so much more freeing than following the confines of whatever the structure or the person said or the story is. But I'm concerned about the the rise of glorifying violence at the expense of care, and why that's so central to the domination theory? Like, why is it just because we're lazy and it's easy to be like, ah, it's girl or boy, versus like taking a second. And I'll give one quick analogy that I think is really helpful. Um, my daughter, when she was 3, her favorite color was pink. And then when she turned 4, it was purple. And then when she turned 5, it changed to silver. And then 6, it turned into unicorn. And the the world seemed very accommodating in her movement and shift into her favorite color and how she was understanding colors and how it was part of her identity and how it was self-expressive. But yet we don't let that self-expression or flexibility or sculptability translate past, like, I don't know, 11, 12. For boys, it's probably 6, 7. And so I'm just wondering, like, but why is it worse now?
Because the accelerating movements to move towards partnership are really the response is going back to a more rigid domination system.
Why is going toward partnership so scary? Why is what I would say the left, maybe we could call it the left. Maybe it's like this idea of more caretaking and more fluidity. Why is that so scary?
First of all, it isn't the left, because if you look at the former USSR, it became a top-down system, the dictatorship of the proletariat. Okay, so I, and this is not about shaming or blaming anyone,
Mhm.
much less our parents who are simply, you know, by spanking, by using violence. We're having the Center for Partnership Systems is having a summit um, in on October 29 called Peace Begins at Home. And you're all invited to it.
We'll drop the link in the chat. And yes, we're also probably going to be broadcasting it on all of these
Well,
platforms too.
good. But I mean, the point of it is we need to show that we have a better alternative. I mean, who was it? Um, I think it was Buckminster Fuller who said, what we need is not to criticize, we need to show that there is a better alternative. And so my life has been devoted to really identifying that alternative. And it does include childhood and family as a cornerstone. It includes gender as a cornerstone. And our job is to really focus on root causes rather than on merely symptoms. Okay? And because if we just focus on tactics, on putting out the fires, well, nomination systems are constantly, they're trauma factories, starting in families, going on to economics, going on to international, to wars, I mean, to assassinations, to if you've noticed that as part of the regression to domination has been actually an increase in violence. This is not coincidental. I mean, if you're going to rely on violence, it's risky. It's a risky business, isn't it? And we live in a nation of school shootings, of mass shootings. Uh, It's not it's not adaptive, as I've said many times in our age.
Rianne, there's a question in the comment about it says you were a Holocaust refugee, so she is a survivor of a name of a place that I can't speak to. I don't know if you can see that word.
Wait, I can't see one guest. No, I don't. Holocaust
It's a
refugee survivor from the concentrations. Slag.
slugger. Oh, you know what? That's that
I'm a child refugee from the Holocaust, and my parents and I, we were very fortunate. in that we uh, were able to get out, and my whole extended family practically was wiped out in those concentration camps.
Riane, will you tell us the story about how you were on the last ship?
But we actually were not on the last ship.
Okay.
We were on one of the last ships. And I still remember standing in Havana on the Malecon, on the pier, uh, thinking, how can people be so cruel? Because,
How old were you?
I was 7, 8, you know, 7 years old at the time. It, 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 the ship was turned back because there was a movie made about it,
Mhm,
the
mhm.
St. Louis, and it was called The Ship of the Damned. And it was the ship of the damned. No nation, including these United States, accepted the refugees, most of whom were Jewish, from Nazi Germany, and they had to go back to Europe, and many of them ended up in Nazi concentration camps and death camps. But the thing about it is that was the domination system, and we are not told how much it focused on gender. We are not told how much it focused on childhood, just as this regression focuses on control of what children learn, right? Control, I mean, control of what children are exposed to, even. Uh, it's very much of a thought control uh, system to maintain. Well, but this again, I want to say, is not a question of shame or blame. This is a question of showing that there is a better alternative and that we are moving towards it, trying to move toward it, but we don't have the frame, most of us, of the domination partnership social scale. Whereas those pushing us back intuitively have that frame.
Oh, that's
They,
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah,
they
because
they
it's
do.
already in our bone marrow, and we're also familiar with it because it's how our policing system works, it's how our elementary schools were run, it's how yes, we're familiar with it. Even if it wasn't in our own household, we are intimately familiar with friends who it was in their own household.
And I want to say this that well, I'm German and my grandfather was in the SS. I know firsthand that a lot of terrible things happened there. My condolences, something like that shall never happen again. I hope you're well. There are always better alternatives. We as people must be better than that. Well, thank you for that comment. And that is really important, the recognition of what happened. Uh, I, uh, th- I was actually invited to Germany by none other than, well, the president of the German parliament, Rita Süßmuth, a woman, but a conservative woman. And I was also invited to speak to Volkswagen by the then president of Volkswagen, Daniel Goedewell. So there is this tension between two different ways, isn't there, all through our history? And it's today coming to a head, isn't it?
I'm curious if you think it's coming to a head or if you think we're in the first quarter of it. I I I'm so appreciative of the acknowledgement and in the chat, and was working with some female activists who are on the ground in the West Bank and in Tel Aviv as part of the peace camp. And they were telling me how important the constant acknowledgement of the pain has been, is going to need to be, and that even with some of their work with in Rwanda, even 20 30 years later, that there still has to be this constant acknowledgement, particularly to the women, who were victims of rape as a weapon of war, that this constant acknowledging the thing that happened then and the collective commitment to moving forward is so key. And I wonder, as part of what we just saw role modeled in the chat and how appreciative you were, if there's a way for activists or communities or just people in general who are so concerned about the rise of domination culture and the regression back to violence as the fail-safe, um, is that is there anything from partnership societies from the past that we can resurface to help us resist the spread of authoritarianism today?
Well, I think that just knowing that
Hmm,
this was not the original direction of cultural evolution is very important. And not just knowing that a lot of the stories that we've been told, like the caveman cartoon, like Original Sin, like Selfish Genes. Look, did you know that nations like Finland, for example, or Sweden, that have moved more to the partnership side, and yes, it involves childhood, gender, changing the stereotypes of masculinity and femininity, and changing economics, which I really would like to talk about at some point.
we will.
The thing that we have to understand is that we don't want to get back to any good old days. We just want
Right.
to acknowledge that this is not human nature. Violence is learned. And believe me, violence in families. And one of the aims of the summit, by the way, and it's a small sidebar, really, is to make people start using the term family violence instead of domestic violence.
Can you
Mhm.
explain why?
Well, because we've marginalized anything that just affects women or mainly affects women and children. Just as and this is why we really need to change our worldview to understand that the struggle is not left versus right or capitalist versus socialist or religious versus secular. You do know at the core of all practically faith lie so-called feminine teachings of caring, of nonviolence, of peace, of do unto others what you would have done to you. But then there is this dominator overlay. And why is it being used against us? I mean, and yes, the dominator overlay is blaming woman for all of man's ills, right? But it's baked into the system, and we can't just dismiss gender and dismiss childhood. I mean, we know from neuroscience, my latest book, which came out with Oxford University Press in 2019, is called Nurturing Our Humanity. And it shows that what we know from neuroscience is that what children observe or experience, especially in their early years, affects nothing less than how our brains develop, and hence how we think, how we feel, how we act, including how we vote. And let's just really deal with basics now. But the thing is this, we're told, yeah, we're told this about neuroscience, but it's in one corner, and then in another corner is the piece, that actually nonviolence um, has had very good results in changing. Look at what happened in India with the Gandhian. Oh, and Kasturba. I was just in a film about Kasturba, who was the wife of Mahatma Gandhi. Have you ever heard of her?
Yeah, I know of her, but not I have to watch the film to know more.
Well, they had a partnership. I mean, they really did. And she was very important. But Most people have never heard of her, including actually me. I had not heard of her. So, again, this is not about blame or shame. This is about change and really survival at this point, not only thriving, because people
Right.
thrive
Right.
in partnership systems,
Right.
whereas nobody really thrives in the domination system. Even those on top are constantly afraid that they're going to lose their place,
That's
right?
right. That's right. That's right. And you could sometimes stories and myths about your access to money, your access to control, like, that feels so at the core of what seems to be frightening folks is breaking the binary, specifically the gender binary. And then there's the myth of, like, you never have enough, constantly consume or acquire or hoard. And the having the enoughness is where the power is, or, like, power is the testament of success. Mind you, like, the billionaires and the incredibly powerful people I know are no more no more happy, feel no more cared for than the than me. I have none of those things. Um, and it does strike me that caretaking and taking care of, and again, not the feminized version of just what caring is, but the idea of being conscious for the collective good as being like an adjusted framework, I think is maybe what you're referencing. But I also, Rianne, in my head, I'm like, the only jobs that could potentially exist in the future are going to be caretaking jobs, right? If, like, I don't need to hire a tax accountant or a lawyer or like,
Well,
are we all going to end up being forced back into caretaking? And then, oh my gosh, we're finally going to be nice to each other.
well, look, we're in the age of AI, first of all. And so the future of work as has been defined by both capitalism and socialism as productive only being really in industrialized society men's work, right? I mean, I still remember when I was younger and I woke up one day and thought, because I didn't have any feminist consciousness whatsoever. Um, in fact, I was, as an attorney, I was one day called into the office of the head honcho of the entertainment law in Beverly Hills law firm that I was working for. And he wanted to compliment me. And he said, "You don't think like a woman." And he meant it as a compliment, and I took it as a compliment. Okay. So consciousness can change. We all can change. And that change is what I'm working on. I forgot what it is that you wanted to know. So,
It's fine. I actually think that the question in the chat right now is a really important one if you want to read that.
all right, the most formative things always happen in childhood. The question is, if we assume that someone has a childhood that isn't child friendly, is that still reversible? Or can we develop further as a society? The brain is plastic. That's why regimes always want to get their hands on children's minds. Thank you for that question. Yes, and that is true. Authoritarianism thrives, as did Hitler's Germany and Austria, on the mind and on in group versus out group blaming and shaming, and on denial. Have you
Mm.
noticed that people who are traumatized tend to go into denial starting in childhood? But the good news is that we have flexible brains. Now, we should start in childhood because, as those of us who have uh, experience with change know, it's a laborious project, isn't it? And so let's start where it's much easier. But we can change at any time in our lives, and people do all the time. I did into my adult life. I mean, I just told you the story of what I took as a compliment.
I think I've received that compliment, some version of that compliment, and been like, "Thanks." I mean, it was my own internalized misogyny.
Yeah.
Um, but, you know, I think what I'm most intimidated by in our final few minutes, and just a quick room reset. We are here with Riane Eisler, who is a Holocaust survivor, and I don't know a lot of people who are thinking like you or who have thought like you, Riane, and I spend my time only looking for the people with the craziest ideas. And Riane has Riane has written so many books on rethinking economies and how we take care of each other and what are the things that have gotten us to the violent world that we live in today. Um, Riane, in my final question for you before we welcome in a host of other folks who are specifically doing the work around breaking masculinity myths and stories and domination behaviors, tendencies of ours, is just that it's easy to talk about, as you mentioned, the Nobel Prize winners' relationship or interconnectivity with each other. That where I stop really isn't actually where I think I stop. That we are connected at a level that we'll probably never understand unless, of course, you do psychedelics, which I've done, and it is very clear to us, or it was very clear to me in those experiences how we are. But it seems like stories and myths about heroes, our relationships with our religions, our faiths, um, are the hardest to break, are the hardest
But
ones to reconsider.
this is exactly why we need a frame of the partnership domination scale. And we need to stop fighting each other, really, about things that don't matter that much.
But
But
how would I say to somebody who thinks it's Pandora's fault or thinks it's Eve's fault or
look, you tell them this, that actually, do they think their mother is to blame?
I think a lot of people blame. I mean, my best friend is a trauma therapist, and she says that most of her clients blame their mothers.
Well, we're taught to, I mean, what else? I mean, we're
Right,
taught to
right,
blame,
right.
we're taught to blame. Uh, look, I think that we need to get rid. There are two forms of humanity. There've always been people in between, regardless of what those who want to return to more rigid domination systems do. Uh, but if we change the stereotype of femininity and masculinity, we're changing what we think about human nature and caring, an economic system that gives visibility and value and reward to caring for people, starting with
Yep.
us, and caring for our Mother Earth, our natural environment, is something so urgent right now. And there are trends in that direction. But notice how they are resisted by those who want to go back to domination systems. Now, if we can really convince, David, my wonderful late husband, David Loy, who, by the way, debunked the interpretation of Darwin as this 800, in his words, 800-pound gorilla for domination, because he completely misinterpreted. And I really recommend his book, Darwin's Lost Theory, as well as what is it?
This is his book, The Healing of a Nation.
Oh, The Healing of a Nation. You've got it upside down and sideways for the
Sorry.
camera. Well, that was his book on race relations, which is one form of in-group versus out-group uh, thinking, really, that is characteristic of domination systems. Look, we can reparent adults, as I see in one of the wonderful comments that we have here. Because even as adults, as I can testify to, um, we can change.
Riane Eisler, thank you. So it's rare that I try to say thank you to somebody and like, oh, that was pointless. Like I don't the amount of gratitude that so many future generations whose names we'll never know will have for you is profound. And I'm so honored that you have given me a few minutes of your time over the years. And as I try to say to you, I promise you there are people, and I certainly am raising my hand to try to carry the torch of some of these ideas because it's been so critical. We are going to welcome Riane back many, many more times here on the Land of End. And we are going to continue to unpack some of her theories, which seem so evergreen and sustainable. I know that one of the key people who have been commenting in this conversation just offered a really beautiful comment to wrap this up. Riane is also hosting a virtual summit on October 29th, and we are in the process of sorting out how we can make sure we lift that up too. That link will be dropped in the chat as well. You can follow Riane on all of the very obvious spaces. Her foundation, the Center for Partnership Studies, is a 501(c)(3) and is always looking for resources if you have any. And Riane, we will see you back here on the Land of End very shortly. Thank you so much for the time.
Well, it's a pleasure for me to be with you.